Support for this episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is made possible by the Wessex Press, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wessexpress.com. And the Baker Street Journal, the leading publication of Sherlockian scholarship since 1946. Subscriptions available at bakerstreetjournal.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 121, Canada and Sherlock Holmes.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became a chronicler.
In a world where it's always 1895, comes I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we discuss goings-on in the world of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, the Baker Street Irregulars, and popular culture related to the great detective.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
And, that is how we welcome you to this episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Doug McKenzie.
Wait a minute, I thought I was Doug McKenzie.
Oh, I'm Bob McKenzie.
Okay. And I'm Burt Wolder. Oh, that's very funny. I like that. You did that very well.
Take off, you hoser.
Yeah.
Well, for those of you who did not recognize that opening call, that was the Great White North, Bob and Doug McKenzie, our good friends up in Canada there. Of course, portrayed by, Rick Moranis and I'm blanking on his name.
Oh, I don't remember.
I'm killing me. Who was Doug McKenzie?
Rick Moranis. Oh, it was the same guy who did Such a Great Bob Hope. Wasn't
Dave
it?
Thomas.
Dave Thomas.
Dave
right.
Thomas.
Second City.
Yeah, SCTV.
Boy, it's funny. I can remember the impression before I remember the actor. His Hope was terrific.
That's right. It is actually. Well, we hope you haven't dropped off the face of the earth now that you've been totally flummoxed by this intro from I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. We do want to get right to our esteemed guest that we have here. But first, we need to talk to you about these guys.
June in the ancient Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Wessex means it will soon be time for haymaking, when our villagers use long-handled scythes to cut close to the ground. That's always tough on the ankles of all those anthropology graduates from Exeter. But you don't need to wear thick socks because you play the grand game, an intellectual exercise to discover a deeper knowledge of the canon by examining clues in the stories themselves. And you owe it all to your copy of Ronald, Knox, and Sherlock Holmes, The Origins of Sherlockian Studies, edited by Michael J. Crow from our WessexPress.com. These 5 groundbreaking essays are sure to enhance your enjoyment of the great detective. Friends, it's haytime, and the red-complexioned sun is scarcely up ere blackbirds have begun. It's the perfect time to head for the hammock with a volume from the Wessex Press. Choose yours today.
It's encouraging to know that Wessex Press continues to sell their wares in this day and age. They've weathered the eras well.
I think they're drinking a lot of beer because, there isn't really proper water filtration in the ancient Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Wessex. And I think the beer has a lot to do with their productivity.
Beer and mead.
Yes.
Don't forget
here,
the
here.
mead. Well, we're not here to talk about beer, but we are here to talk about one aspect of the Great White North, specifically this book, Canada and Sherlock Holmes, the latest out of the Baker Street Irregulars International Series. You can, of course, find it at bakerstreetjournal.com. It is co-edited by Peter Calamai and Mark Alberstadt. And we actually are fortunate enough to have Peter Calamai with us today on the show. Now, if you can stick with us through this intro, Peter Calamai, he's got a number of letters after his name. BSI, of course you recognize that. MBT, that's Master Bootmaker, and CM, which is a member of the Order of Canada. Peter graduated from McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, with extensive experience in student newspapering, and incidentally a BSc in physics. More than 45 years in Canadian daily newspaper journalism ensued, with correspondent postings in Ottawa, London, Vancouver, Nairobi, and Washington, followed by stints as editorial pages editor of the Ottawa Citizen and national science reporter for the Toronto Star. Currently a freelance magazine writer, Peter lives in Ottawa and is an adjunct research professor in the School of Journalism at Carleton University. He's published roughly 8,000 newspaper articles, more than 50 Sherlockian articles, and was given the BSI's Morley Montgomery Award in 2012 for his Baker Street Journal article, Why He Isn't Sir Sherlock Today. Peter's a member at large on the executive board of the Bootmakers of Toronto, and in 2014, Peter was made a member of the Order of Canada for his achievements as a science journalist and his contributions to the cause of literacy. Peter, welcome to the program.
Great to be here.
I have to say, I think this is the first time we've had a member of the Order of Canada on our show. What's it like?
Well, I hope it's not the last.
Well,
do you have any friends you could line up for us so that we have future members of the Order of Canada to talk to? That would be.
You want them to talk about Sherlockian things, don't you?
We're here to talk about Canadian things.
Well, I was just curious.
Now, is there an official ceremony where, the swords come out or anything like that? Or what's it like?
No, there's an official ceremony. They do about 100 at a time, and they do it maybe 3 times a year, and they're limited to that many because it's a sit-down banquet. So, with all the people present with their significant others. So that's about the limit they can do. And you come up to the front of the very grand room, and your citation is read out, which is about 50 words or so. Mm-hmm. And then you march over to the Governor General, and he pins the medal on your left lapel, as it were. Mm. Or that's for members like me. For the next 2 ranks above that, officers and companions, you get a medal that hangs around your neck on a ribbon. But you don't wear these anyhow at any time. The members of the people in the Order of Canada only wear those medals for grand ceremonial occasions, or when you're invited to something when it says decorations on the invitation. Otherwise, what you wear is a very small, discreet, white snowflake in your left lapel. And the snowflakes are distinguished by their center between the people who are members, the people who are officers, and the very, very few who are companions. And they have a different color in the center. So,
very interesting.
Right. Mm-hmm. And you can officially, you can wear them at any time. Most people don't tend to wear them on their pajamas, but there are rumors.
Well, I hope you're wearing yours during the interview here.
No, because I don't have a jacket or a cardigan on.
Uh-oh.
My wife won't let me wear it on a plain old shirt.
That's good. Well, this is one of the few Sherlockian areas where you can get away without even wearing pants if you had to.
No, that's the Speckled Band.
Not anymore.
Good, Bert. Very good, Bert. Yes.
Well, we're not here to talk about pants or
of course,
pins.
if there's one more person here, it could be the sign of the four without pants, but we'll leave that.
Yeah. Oh boy. Well, let's quickly.
Come on, Scott. Take control of this.
Let's quickly turn the tables. All it takes is getting a journalist in here, and it just throws things for a loop. So, Peter, you have had a long and distinguished career in the journalism field, part of which was your honor as being made a member of the Order of Canada, but your achievements were also for the cause of literacy, and we want to talk about literacy specifically as it relates to Sherlock Holmes. So why don't we start out by you telling us something about your origins with Sherlock Holmes? How did you first meet?
I know most people remember this as a red letter time in their life, but I don't remember when I first met Sherlock Holmes. I remember when I didn't meet Sherlock Holmes. I lived in London for 4 years, from 1973 to 1977, just down from the Baker Street tube stop, or just over from the Marylebone Station's tube stop, which meant that I was about a street and a half away from the branch of the Westminster Library that housed, at that time, the Arthur Conan Doyle collection. I never went in. I was there for 4 years. I never went into that branch. I never looked at the collection. I had absolutely no interest in it whatsoever. So I've confessed my dark mortal sin.
And so you made them move the collection over to Toronto so it would be closer to you?
No. I fell into Sherlock Holmes through the hounds of the internet. And I don't actually know I don't remember what first introduced me to the hounds of the internet, but it was in those days, in the 1980s and 90s, quite a going concern with all sorts of characters taking part in it, and a very high level of discussion. And I wandered in there and decided that what they needed to have was someone who knew about the press in Victorian society and was familiar with how the press operated, and therefore how Holmes might have used it. That prompted me to then read the canon and look for examples of how Holmes would have used it. I had read some Sherlock Holmes stories before there, but I had definitely not read the canon. And I started posting little bits about how Sherlock Holmes used the press. And out of the blue, I got an invitation to go to Bennington, Vermont for their first conference put on by the group there. You'll have to look up the date. I can't remember it. And I said to my wife, I've been invited to Bennington to talk about Sherlock Holmes. And she was as flabbergasted as I was. Anyway, I went down, and the room was filled with notables, right? I mean, the Peter Blau class of notable. I was quite nervous, because these were people who actually did know something about Sherlock Holmes, whereas all I knew about was the press in Victorian Britain. But I prattled on about my topic, how the press used Sherlock Holmes, and it's reprinted in the conference proceedings. And strange to say, without any malice aforethought, I had stumbled across one of the rare unplowed corners of Sherlockian scholarship. You remember a couple of sessions ago, you gentlemen were talking about wither Sherlockian scholarship and raising, or at least someone had raised the possibility that there are no new worlds left to discover or conquer, and we should all, like Alexander the Great, mourn this. But in fact, it's not true. For every person who wants to write an article about Watson's wandering wound, or railway timetables, and here I'm going to lose you some listeners right at this point, the most boring subject on the face of the earth, brackets. There are people writing about all sorts of things that other people have never written about, or podcasting about them, or, doing presentations about them. Anyway, I had discovered some fresh meat, and the people in the room at Bennington encouraged me to continue committing this sort of scholarship, and so I did. That's how it started. That began in Bennington, you could say.
That's amazing. So that would be with Sally Sugarman and company up there?
Yeah, Sally and Bob, yep.
Yeah.
And I could, if I could make a really long arm, I could reach over and get the conference proceedings, but they're too far behind me to do.
That's okay.
I can't remember exactly when it was.
Now, if I recall, your nom de plume on the Hounds of the Internet was none other than Horace Harker.
It was, but that's taken in the BSI, of course.
Is.
But yes, it was. It was chosen because, he worked for the Central Press Agency or Central Press Syndicate, I can't remember which it was, which was a news agency, and I worked for a news agency for most of my time in journalism, and therefore I thought there was an analogy there. And I then wrote later about Horace Harker and how he was unjustly maligned for his lack of journalistic inventiveness. How Sherlock Holmes used him, in effect. The press, Watson, is a valuable institution so long as you know how to use it. And he had scammed Horace Harker. It's sort of the thing that happens daily in Washington nowadays, right?
Yes. Very much. This must be almost like a sport for you to watch.
Yes, indeed. The false news, alternate facts. That was, of course, the line that Holmes fed, or had fed to.
That's true.
Horace Harker about the Napoleon man, somebody with a Napoleon fixation going around breaking these busts when he knew that, of course, that wasn't true.
Well, there's another paper for you right there, Sherlock Holmes.
I wrote that one.
Oh, you did?
I wrote that one about how Horace Harker was hard done by, yes. It was in the BSI book about the Six Napoleons.
Oh, yeah,
when they reprinted the facsimile of the Six Napoleons, right?
But
edited by none other than Horace Harker, actually.
Yeah, Bill Hyder, right?
Yes, correct.
Indeed. So, you could go and, take that and look at it from another angle and say Sherlock Holmes was the original fake news progenitor.
The Spicer of his times, you mean?
Oh, so
I'll let you have that one, Scott.
No, that's got 10-foot pole marks all over it. Tell us a little bit about the master bootmakers. How did you come by Sherlockians in your home territory? Or I should say home, I gotta be careful. This is Canada. In your home province.
I only lived in Toronto for 8 months of my life.
Really?
So, and the bootmakers, of course, are based in Toronto. So all of my dealings with the bootmakers were at long distance. I mean, I would attend meetings, but it was quite an effort. Ottawa is where I lived for much of that time. Is a good 5 hours drive from Toronto and longer by train. But I, even despite the distance, I managed to make some contributions to the bootmakers, and particularly to some of the conferences which they held, and also which the Friends of the Arthur Conan Doyle Society held, and which they held together as well, right? And it was because of that I was made a master bootmaker for those contributions. I mean, basically, you get voted a master bootmaker for keeping the memory green, in an active way. And I read papers at the meetings I did make, and contributed to the conferences and pestered people by telephone and email, but I wasn't there physically much because of the distances I was away.
Now, did you find out about the master bootmakers, or the bootmakers, before or after your Bennington experience?
After.
After, okay. Were there any bootmakers there?
Yes, there were, but who would it have been? It was, isn't that a shame? I'd have to look back at the list. Cameron Hollier may well have been there. I don't remember, per se. And, but yes, there were some bootmakers there for sure.
That's great. So one thing led to another. Now, in your piece in the book, Canada and Sherlock Holmes, which, by the way, is available on BakerStreetJournal.com. This is, the latest in the BSI's International Series. I think we are up to book, 6. This is the 6th volume in the International Series. You have a piece in there that is very aptly titled, A Mare Usque Ad Mare, which is actually Canada's national motto. Could you translate that for us?
From sea onto sea, or sometimes people say from sea even onto sea, but the literal translation would be from sea to sea.
So that obviously refers to the breadth of Canada's expanse across the top of North America. From Atlantic
nowadays many people in Canada, particularly politicians, like to say from sea to sea to sea, because of course we have the second longest Arctic coastline in the world after Russia.
That's right.
As well. So we have 3 seas. Atlantic, Pacific, and Arctic.
Hey, the 3 C's, Bert.
3 C's. Yeah, very good.
Continuing Canadian coastlines.
When you mentioned the book, you should, of course, mention that I was only a co-editor of the book, and that the other person responsible for getting it out, and particularly getting it out in the final year when I was in the throes of moving, was Mark Alberstratt, the editor of Canadian Holmes, who can't be with us because he has a real job that requires him to go and work somewhere.
What a shame.
Yeah. And Mark has been a Sherlockian since, I think, his teen.
Yes, and was the founder and the mainstay of the Spenceman Rose of Halifax, which he runs with Joanne, his wife, co-editor of Canadian Holmes.
Mark will be joining us in a future episode somewhere down the line to talk about that and also to kind of continue on the chat about the book.
Yeah.
But in your article, Peter, Mare Usque Ad Mare, it really, I think it not only obviously borrows on the Canadian national motto in terms of the breadth of the country, but it also addresses the breadth of Sherlockian activity and interests that have captured Canada for over a century now. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, thanks to work that was done by Les Klinger and then publicized by Les Klinger and Laurier King, we discovered that there was a Sherlockian pioneer in Canada in 1902, at the same time as Frank Sedgwick in England and Arthur Bartlett Morris in the United States were writing 1902. And they've been long recognized as pioneers, but the man in Canada, James Bovell Mackenzie, wasn't really acknowledged that way at all. He disappeared into the mist of time until 2011, when his original paper from 1902, Sherlock Holmes Plots and Strategies, was reprinted in The Grand Game, the book edited by Les Klinger and Laurier King. Grand Game, a celebration of Sherlockian scholarship.
Yeah.
And there my eyes fell upon it, and I said, holy moly, I didn't know that we had a man who was a pioneer. And in fact, they called him the Lost Pioneer, or I picked up that name from somewhere. And he only did the one thing, the one article as far as we could find out. And Les Klinger did some detective work back, when he first ran across him, with help from, the Law Society of Upper Canada, and found that this man was a lawyer. He had worked in a law office in a town called Brantford, Ontario, where I was raised, strangely. And he wrote regularly for a publication, the name of which was The Green Bag. The subtitle was An Entertaining Magazine for Lawyers. It was published by the Boston Book Company, not anybody in Canada. And he wrote for them about history and other things. He wrote history of what we now call First Nations peoples, but then called Indians. And he wrote this one article about Sherlock Holmes' plots and strategies. And that was the only thing he ever did, as far as we can discover about Sherlock Holmes. Mark and I spent a fair amount of time and effort trying to find out more about him, but as far as we can tell, he died in 1919. He never married. There are no direct descendants to throw light on why he wrote only this one piece of higher criticism. We looked at the census and found that he was living in Toronto back in 1891, and there were other people in the house, and we couldn't trace any of them either. So he is, as Les Clear said, the lost pioneer. And then, to skip forward just a little bit, there was a great hiatus, and there was nothing until July 1945 when the first known Sherlockian society, called the Canadian Baskervilles, was formed. Now, that doesn't mean nothing was happening. It wasn't a wasteland, because as you probably know, and as anyone who reads the book will find out, Arthur Conan Doyle paid visits to Canada 3 times in that period, 1894, 1914, and 1923, and all the details of that, plus a selection of the pictures taken by the Conan Doyle family, are in this volume, right? But there was no organized Sherlockian activity until 1945, after the first article in 1902. It was the great hiatus.
And, one thing.
I'm sorry. I should say, of course, because you've already had this on the program, that the William Gillette film was shown in Canada back in 1916. The recently rediscovered and restored William Gillette film was shown, and it got publicity, but that didn't lead to anything. Just like the appearance of the rest of the canon didn't lead to anything.
So it was the Canadian Baskervilles that really kind of restarted things, or in some cases simply started things from a societal standpoint. And
yes.
There's something. There's a quote from your article which contained an excerpt from a 34-page history of the Baskervilles that I want to highlight, because I think it's worth noting. And this is where the Canadians are just so far ahead of their time, and as usual, ahead of the Americans. Right from its inception, the Canadian Society took a different path from that of most Sherlockian groups. Every member had the equivalent rank and title of baronet, in contrast to the whimsical trappings of common elsewhere, with the order of joining indicated by first, second, third, etc., in front of the title. Women became full members right from the start, an egalitarian approach still not universal.
Now, of course, if you went on to read the next sentence, it would say, even more unusual, the Baskervilles never held a formal meeting during their 15 years or so of existence.
So it was a correspondence society.
Yeah, it was a corresponding society, and they produced a one-page newsletter. And the key mainstay of it was a professor of political economy at my alma mater, McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, who did know people like Edgar Smith and Chris Morley and Vincent Starrett, and belonged to the Hounds of the Baskerville in Chicago. And he had other people with him who had similar backgrounds, similar academic backgrounds. And I can't remember whether I stole this from no, it was from in their, they described their approach to Sherlockian affairs as masterly inactivity.
That works. Now, concurrently, or nearly concurrently, there was another society that was founded in Toronto called the Baker Street Squires. And this is where we first start to hear of one S. Tupper Bigelow. You know that name, right, Bert?
Yes, and Peter was kind enough to correct some of our discussion. I guess that was that in Trifles?
It was on Trifles, yeah.
Yeah,
the Silver
our
Blaze
discussion
show.
of Silver Blaze, where I sort of garbled the exact place that Justice Bigelow fit in and how he got to be there. But I'm thrilled that Canada and Sherlock Holmes includes S. Tupper Bigelow's If We Have to Be Whimsical.
Yes. Now, the Squires didn't last that long either. They certainly disappeared in the early 1960s somewhere. They did sponsor a Silver Blaze racetrack in 1962 at a racetrack near Toronto, but it wasn't until 1972, 11 years later or so, that the bootmakers of Toronto emerged from the fog that picked up the torch of Sherlockian society activity in Canada.
And that stuck.
That has stuck so far, yes. And spawned progeny.
Yes.
Although it gets complicated because it's not clear that the other societies in Canada are necessarily scions of the bootmakers or freestanding. The book calls them bootmaker scion societies, but some of them might argue the point.
Got it. And there have been 9 that have sprouted from the loins of the bootmakers, or from the soul of the bootmakers, if I may be so bold.
That's good, yes. That's 9 in Canada and 1 overseas.
1 overseas. Where's the overseas one?
In Kenya. Dr. Sterndale's Lion Hunters in Kenya, founded in 1993 by none other than George Vandenberg, who was in Kenya at the time in his role as a medical officer with the Canadian military.
That would do it. That's great.
It was approved, the bootmakers executive approved it as a scion society for a trial period of 2 years. It appears to be dormant.
Yes, I see George regularly around these parts in Michigan, so I take it he's not still over in Kenya.
No. And in fact, I think it was dormant a year after it was started. But I mean, don't forget, George did publish one of the canonical stories in Kiswahili.
Oh, which I'm sure Don Hobbs, collector of international tomes, has a copy of.
Everyone has a copy of it. I have a copy of it. You don't have a copy of it?
Not yet.
You must have. Come on.
I need to send for it, but I need to learn Swahili before I can send the postcard out.
Oh, no, you can work on it. It's no problem. Kiswahili is a completely phonetic language. It's very simple.
So what's really interesting about Canada in general, and specifically about this book, is the parallel paths that Sherlock Holmes and Arthur Conan Doyle take as far as interest and activity and centering around certain items in Canada. And this really has to do with the establishment of the Arthur Conan Doyle collection, which is housed at the Toronto Public Library. It's got to be one of the great bragging points for the bootmakers, I would imagine.
Oh, well, of course it's a bragging point for the bootmakers, but it's also a bragging point for the Friends of the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection, which is a separate organization, which has cross-membership for many
I would
people
imagine,
as well, but nonetheless. And they published in May of 2014, the Friends published a booklet about the collection itself, how it came to be, who the movers were, because at that point it moved into a new home in a special collection center at the Toronto Reference Library. The Toronto Reference Library is part of the Toronto Public Library, but it's a very special part. None of the books can be taken out. It's not a circulating library.
Yes.
The books are only for consultation there. And that's not just for the Arthur Conan Doyle collection. That's for all the books in the reference library. So it's filled with people hunched over laptops and screens with books that they can't get anywhere else.
That's one way to ensure attendance.
Yes. It's also one way to assure that you keep your books.
That's true, too.
And they don't get, destroyed or pitched or any number of other things that happen.
Well, we'll be revisiting this topic later in the year. We're going to have Peggy Perdue on the show. This is going to be a Canadian-heavy year on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Good.
Peggy, of course, is a librarian at
the curator,
at the Toronto Reference Library. And later this year, there's an exhibit called Pop Sherlock that's going to be running there. We're going to talk with her about that. But meanwhile...
But in the book, in Canada and Sherlock Holmes, we devoted 40 pages to the Arthur Conan Doyle collection because it's one of the things that's outstanding in Sherlockian the world and gives Canada, as you say, bragging rights because we have a collection. There's only two other countries in the world anyhow, the United States and then Britain, in 2 locations in Britain that have collections of this magnitude.
That's right? And it's everything from the original journals that contain the Angels of Darkness manuscript to Peggy herself writing about what's Canadian in the Canadian collection. Barbara Rush talking about some hidden ephemera treasures in Toronto. And I just learned something about Barbara Rush the other day. There was a piece, I don't know if it was in the Toronto Star or which publication. Barbara collects Victoriana.
You didn't know that Barbara had Queen Victoria's court knickers?
I did not.
Oh, my goodness. You should come to a meeting of the bootmakers and she'll bring them and display them for you in 3 dimensions.
Oh, that was fascinating to learn. We also have Doug Wrigglesworth talking about the Friends of the ACD collection. And this one, we wanted to pause on a little bit and have you tell us a little about. This was a piece by Hartley Nathan, who himself is a lawyer, talking about the 4 pillars. What are the 4 pillars and who are they and why are they important?
Well, the 4 pillars are the 4 major purchases that constitute the library as it is today. And they were made between 1969, and the early 1970s by 4 people. One of whom you'll recognize as Tupper Bigelow, but others you may not. Arthur Bailey, Harold Mortlake, and Nathan Bengus, who you probably should recognize as well since he was well known. And their contributions and how it came about were in this pamphlet that was produced for the anniversary, for the move into the new quarters. And what Hartley kindly did for us was condense that section into this book to give it wider circulation elsewhere. And he runs through who all these people were. I mean, Arthur Bailey was a man from whom 500 volumes of vintage detective stories, horror stories, and thrillers of all kind was bought from his estate. And this then became the first collection because it was sold to the library by Hugh Anson Cartwright, an antiquarian bookseller in Toronto from whom I've bought books and so have a lot of other people. And for $1,000, he sold it to the collection. And then after that, S. Tupper Bigelow, who donated many of his collection to that. Donated is probably the wrong word. They purchased it for $7,000. But in that material, one of the things I thought was most interesting was his file cards, which consisted of his index of the writings on the writings, right? And where he would laboriously by hand make bibliographic notes on everything that appeared in any publication that came to his attention, and many of his publications did come to his attention, so that for years, people who wanted to find out, before we had the universal Sherlock Holmes, people who wanted to find out, has anything been published on this study, would look at the Bigelow Index, and Don Redmond updated it and there's a publication called Bigelow on Holmes. So it was part of what came in his collection. Harold Mortlake, the third pillar, was a bookseller in London, England, and he listed several hundred items in his catalog in 1969. And the library, headed with Donald Redmond giving them a heads up, bought that in 1970, 877 items, 2,500 pounds, or if you convert that to Canadian dollars, $6,250, or about 5 cents American at the current rate of exchange between the Canadian dollar and the American dollar. And the fourth pillar, Nathan Lewis Bingus, was a Greek and Latin scholar who taught Spanish to junior high school students in New York City until he retired in 1963. He was the lion's mane in the BSI, founding member of the Sherlock Holmes Society of London. And what he collected was editions of the Sign of the Four. He found as many as he could. And in 1970, the library acquired his collection, which is more than 200 copies of the Sign of the Four. Wow. And material he used for a book he published in 1956 called The Signs of Our Times, an Irregular Bibliography. And they're all in a very beautiful case at the reference library. And so we, in that piece where we talked about the four pillars, we also said that there really should be a fifth pillar, and that would be Donald A. Redmond. Because he did an awful lot about with the library by getting them to buy the Bailey collection, putting together Bigelow's writings on the writings, telling the library about Howard Mortlake's catalog of Sherlockiania. And there's in the pamphlet that was put out, there's a paper about Donald A. Redmond and the Arthur Conan Doyle collection. This is the paper that was put up by the Friends, written by Christopher Redmond, his son, right? So, and he definitely, you can't talk about the collection without talking about Donald Redmond.
That is very true. And we'll hear a little bit more from Chris later in the show. And of course, for regular listeners of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, you'll recall that Chris Redmond was our guest on episode 99. If you would like to check that out, just go back to the website and search for it, or simply type in ihose.co/ihose99, all lowercase, into your browser, and you'll get right to that episode. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. Stay with us. When you peruse the many offerings of the Baker Street Journal website, aside from the journal itself, the other sections that have been there since its earliest days online include the BSI History Series, the BSI Manuscript Series, and the BSI International Series. The International Series is a fascinating look at scholarship from around the globe. While subscribers to the Baker Street Journal and the Sherlock Holmes Journal are familiar with American and British scholarship, they may not have been exposed to Sherlockian scholarship from around the world. And with the BSI International Series, you'll follow the map of the world according to Conan Doyle, as sketched out by Julian Wolfe. From Japan to Scandinavia, down under in Australia, over to Italy and Spain, and now the Great White North of Canada are among the volumes. You'll be treated to information about local societies and customs, as well as clever takes on age-old conundrums we've read about in the U.S. I hear of Sherlock everywhere indeed, as Mycroft put it. Get your passport to Sherlockian scholarship stamped by going to BakerStreetJournal.com and purchasing a volume of the International Series today. So, beyond looking at, the organizations and the publications and, the connection with Conan Doyle, we also have an opportunity to go into some scholarship, that was produced by, your peers up there in Canada. And it's quite a diverse variety of material, I must say. We have, well, of course, your own work, Peter. We'd be remiss if we didn't include that. Professor Moriarty, the Criminal Crammer. What's that all about?
Well, there are references to Moriarty being an army coach. And that's about the only thing that's said. Although Holmes at one point says that he's plying his trade, not that far from here where we're standing here now. But I did a little search and found out that there really had not been much written about what a crammer was and what an army coach was. So I decided to research that and spent a fair amount of time looking at primary sources, magazines from the period, using the British Library when I was over there, and described what the crammers were basically a way of getting the stupid sons into the army, because once the army started to demand that they had to actually pass an entrance examination, and they couldn't do so. I mean, the smart sons had gone into law, right? Or, and the third son went into the church. Right. But, the stupid son. So people who had been in the army, usually colonels, just like the canon is replete with colonels, the crammers were replete with colonels, set up schools where they charged a very hefty sum to people to basically tutor their sons in what questions were going to be asked on the entrance exam into Sandhurst and the artillery school. And they had a pretty good record. I mean, Winston Churchill went to a crammer, right? I mean, it wasn't considered a black spot, because the argument was that this was arcane. These people were well versed in all the important stuff, like, modern romances in Latin and Greek. And now here they were being asked to know something about gunnery of all things. Right. So there's actually a patter song making fun of this in HMS Pinafore, where the general who has all the daughters he's trying to marry off talks about, I am the model of the modern major general.
I am the very model of the modern major general. Life, information, vegetable, animal, and mineral. I know the kings of England, and I quote the Pike's historical from Marathon to Waterloo in order categorical.
So, anyway, I researched how these crammers worked and how army coaches worked, and then did a little speculation about which would have been the most likely ones for Moriarty to have worked at, and what he was likely paid to do there. And also speculated that he wasn't operating on his own. He was part of one of these schools, because he couldn't have made a living just from teaching mathematics on his own. That had to be part of a course that was offered elsewhere. So we had, I had great fun with that. That article appeared in the Passenger's Log, which is the journal of the Sydney Passengers, but would not have been seen by many people who were the prospective purchasers of this book.
Right.
I should do a flashback here, if you'll indulge me.
Please.
Which is, how did the book come to be?
Yes.
Several years ago, on the BSI weekend, I went up to Mike Whalen. As they say in the local newspaper here when they're writing about traffic accidents, alcohol may have played a part. Huh. And I said to him, how come you've never published, a book on Canada and Sherlock Holmes? And he said, well, do you think there's enough original scholarship in Canada that the prospective buyers of the book, the international series, would not already have read? And the idea being here that the majority of the buyers of this series tend to be in the United States, right? So there was no problem if you were doing Italy or Scandinavia, because all that material had not been published in English. And, you couldn't have read it with a few exceptions. But all the material and all the scholarship, leave that, there are other things in this book other than the scholarship, but all the scholarship from Canada was published in English, or at least delivered in English as papers somewhere. And I said, no, I think there's tons of good material in Canada that prospective buyers would not have seen and therefore would be interested in the book. And Mike Whalen said, prove it. So I went away and spent a fair amount of time at the Arthur Conan Doyle collection, the Toronto Public Library, which has the archives of the bootmakers plus papers from some of the other Sherlockian scions across Canada. And I went through all of those and found presentations. And then I looked up publications like mine, which had appeared elsewhere than in Canada. And there are others that have been published elsewhere. I eliminated anything that would have been in the BSJ, right? Or Baker Street Miscellany, or any of the publications that appeared in the United States, because people could have looked at them. I eliminated anything that appeared in the anthologies that had been produced here in Canada for the 25th anniversary of the bootmakers. I limited other things in other collections, and I still had, more than 60 items, right, that I thought were worthy of being considered for inclusion in a book. So I sent that list to Mike and said, now, in addition to that, in addition to the section on scholarship, I'm proposing that we have these other sections, section about the Arthur Conan Doyle collection, a section about Arthur Conan Doyle's visits to Canada, and then a selection of songs from people, and a story of the evolution of the Sherlockian movement in Canada, which you've already alluded to, the part that I wrote, and then a couple of other special things, my favorite being and I hope we get a chance to talk about it, the Alan Bradley interview on how Ms. Holmes of Baker Street came to be. And he said, okay, I agree. Go ahead and do it. So then we got down to Mark Alberstadt and I got down to the very hard task of going through the scholarship plus other things and making some tough decisions about what to include or what not to include. And the only advantage of being an editor was we both got our own pieces in, as it were, and mine being the criminal grammar, because I knew it would not have been seen by many people in the United States. And Mark's piece on the Wicked Colonel's Canadian Connection, which is about Spence Monroe. There are only 30 subscribers to Canadian Holmes in all of the United States. So things that appeared in Canadian Holmes itself, rather than in the anthologies, would not have been seen by the majority of Sherlockians in the United States. They just don't subscribe to the Canadian Journal. They don't subscribe to the Australian Journal either, or in fact the British Journal, but they don't subscribe to the ones just across the border. So we knew that we could publish things that had been in the Canadian Holmes itself. But a lot of the things that are in here were in fact never printed. They were given papers that were given, or they're things that we commissioned and they were written for us specifically. End of digression.
Well, no, it's important insight into what makes the book special, because you do have these 4 sections, and that point that this is material that will not have come to the notice of an American audience certainly is very well made, and that you've gathered it all in an interesting organization. So you can find out, as you say, about Conan Doyle's visits to Canada. You can find out new speculation about various connections in the canon and Canada. Learn about the 4 major purchases that comprise the Conan Doyle collection, and then there's the scholarship. So I think you describe it very well. And in that way, it is somewhat unique, I think, compared to the other entries in the International Series, which do not follow that sort of structure.
And of course, you spotted the fact that Canada was the home of the only tap dance production about Sherlock Holmes.
Well, naturally.
Yeah. One of the disappointments in doing the research for this was that we were not able to obtain any real details about that. The Arthur Conan Doyle collection has a copy of the program of the tap dance production, and there's newspaper accounts of it. But we wanted to actually interview some of the people who took part in it, and we were never able to track down the founder of the society, the Tap Dance Troupe of Canada. But we did include that as one of the many different ways in which Sherlock Holmes has been celebrated in Canada.
Is there any truth to the long-standing rumor that tap dance performance about Holmes in Canada was actually the tapping out of every word in The Hound of the Baskervilles in Morse code? Isn't it?
I don't know. That could be. I didn't get a chance to track that down.
It was just Laura Lyons on her typewriter.
Oh yeah, that could be.
See, there you go.
Yeah. Although I remember there was a lot of controversy around the part where Dr. Mortimer says the footsteps of a giant hound. Ba-dum-bum, ba-dum-bum-bum-bum.
They did twirl umbrellas to simulate carriage wheels, so I know that much.
Wow. Well, speaking of simulation, you mentioned
nice, very nice.
I'm trying. You mentioned this in passing before. Alan Bradley and Ms. Holmes of Baker Street. Now, I'm not sure that everyone has heard of Ms. Holmes of Baker Street, so why don't you give us a little background on that and how you got to speak with Alan?
Well, we could forgive people not knowing about the key Swahili translations of the stories in the canon, but can we really forgive anybody who doesn't know about Ms. Holmes of Baker Street?
We can forgive our listeners anything.
Okay, all right. Ms. Holmes of Baker Street was, as is explained in the article in this book, a 10-year labor of love by two professors on the staff at the University of Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan is the narrow, tall province in the middle of Canada, noted for oil, potash, and wheat, probably in that order. And his co-author, Alan Bradley's co-author, was Bill Sargent, who was definitely a Renaissance man. He was a geologist who specialized in prehistoric animal tracks preserved in fossilized ground, but he was also a maven of folk music. He wrote the Rock All Fantasy series. He was a prolific writer on detective mysteries, and he wrote for an English publication called CADS, Crime and Detective Stories. He and Bradley were both Sherlockians, and they actually had a very small Sherlockian society in Saskatoon, where the University of Saskatchewan is. And at one point, as Bradley, it was called the Case Book of Saskatoon. And at one point, Sargent phoned Bradley, who was a director of television engineering at the university, and said, how would you like to commit the ultimate heresy? And Bradley allegedly replied, tell me more. And Sargent had been thinking about Rex Stout Bombshell that Watson was a woman. That's a talk he gave at the BSI, which outraged people at the BSI, right? And Sargent had been looking over the evidence by looking at the canon and said to Bradley, it wasn't Watson who was the woman, it was Holmes, and we should really look into that. So they'd agreed to go through the complete canon and make notes and then compare notes and see which instances they had each cataloged. Notes about, in each of the stories where you could interpret what was said as being evidence of Holmes' femininity. And they went at this process from 1979 to 1988, right? Going through, finding all these examples of what you would call alternate readings of the lines. Like, I'm surprised at your frontal development. Okay? Things like that. And periods of lassitude, which of course could just be periods, and so on, like that. And they were both academics, of course. So they did a very complete job on the footnotes and the bibliography and the references and everything else, because they didn't want anybody able to fault their methods. It was meant as, lighthearted, but nonetheless, what Bradley says in the interview that is reprinted in this volume is that he remembers the rolling on the floor laughing as being the greatest memory he has of doing the book, right? Now, when it got published, the interview talks about how writing the book together and how hard it was to get published. But when it got published, it caused quite a stir, originally in Canada, but then it sort of went around the world, as it were, because this was, as you said, the ultimate heresy. And they got attacked by people when they appeared in Toronto and talked about it on the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation radio show, and came out of someplace. And Bradley says, we had appeared on TV, we were just on the street and realized we didn't have time to go anywhere for lunch because we had so many appointments with the media. So we decided to go into a store and buy some bananas or oranges and something, and we eat them as we were traveling. We were just coming out of the store, and lo and behold, there was a quite elderly lady with an umbrella, and she whacked us. You're the people who thought Sherlock Holmes was a woman, she said.
You brute.
So there. She was wailing away with her umbrella. And they had a public meeting at a major place in Toronto with bootmakers being there, and it got quite vituperative at points, right? I mean, this was the ultimate heresy, indeed. Now, Bill Sargent died, but Alan Bradley is now quite a famous author. He's written the whole Flavia de Luce series, which is now up to at least nine books. He's a bestseller, being made into a TV series. He lives on the Isle of Man, where I interviewed him by phone, and she's a female detective with a home chemistry set, and she's 11 years old, and she's Sherlock Holmes, except that it's never stated that that's who she is. So the story of how that came to be and being whacked on with the umbrella, and how they came up with the idea in the first place, is there, and with it is a wonderful piece of that Alan Bradley was finally able to find for me, which was an example of the first newsletter put out by the very first Sherlockian group he belonged to as a teen, right? Or at least maybe it was early 20s, right? 1979. And we've reproduced that. So, and that's where the first idea appeared about the woman. That's where it first appeared.
There we go.
In 1979. And it's gone through 2 editions, and is still available, and people should buy it. Ms. Holmes of Baker Street. And you will be astonished at the number of lines and descriptions in the canon which can be read to show that Sherlock Holmes was feminine. A female. Not just feminine, was a female.
I'm thinking alone that the Lion in the Speckled Band that I've been knocked up would probably do the trick, but I'm sure Alan and company have come up with many other ways to prove that out. We'll have a link to Ms. Holmes of Baker Street in the show notes, which will be available at ihose.co/ihose121. But the book,
you could also link to the distinguished lecture that Alan Bradley gave to the BSI about 4 years ago, was it, or 3 years ago?
I think that's right.
Where which has been reprinted in the Baker Street Journal, and where he talked about basically nature in the canon, and Conan Doyle's use of nature and images.
Yes. Well, the real link that you want to check out is the one to Canada and Sherlock Holmes from the Baker Street Irregulars International Series, co-edited by Peter Calamai and Mark Alberstadt. That is available in the show notes as well. It's been a delight talking with you, Peter. I know you've been a longtime listener, faithful listener to the show, taking us all across the provinces with you, and even helping you fall asleep at night. So I'm glad we can provide a service here. I hear of Sherlock.
I never claimed you helped me fall asleep. In fact, I claimed you helped me stay awake on long car journeys.
Well, we helped you stay awake during the car journeys, but helped you fall asleep after knee surgery, right?
Okay.
A distinction.
Yeah. And friends, don't forget that when you think about I Hear of Sherlock, because our podcast is available without a prescription.
Well, Peter, thank you for being with us.
My pleasure indeed.
Well, every time I correspond with Peter, whether it's in person, over the phone, or in email, I am always bound to learn something new. Goes without exception.
Yeah. Well, he's been very helpful. It's so lovely to have him engage as a listener as we do these programs, because he's been so helpful in clarifying things that we might get wrong, but also in ideas and suggestions and things that we might add. It's great that we finally got him on the show.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's hope he continues to agree to listen to us after this. Well, it was a delight. And folks, if you have some feedback on what you hear on the show, what you might like to hear, please take the time to get in touch with us. Simply reach out to us on any mode that you think is appropriate. Of course, we cover the telephone at 774-221-READ. That's 774-221-7323. Give us a jingle there if you'd like to talk voice to voice.
Yes, and you can send us an email at comment@ihearofsherlock.com. We're everywhere on social media, Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter, every place where you see them, you see I Hear of Sherlock.
That is true.
So facebook.com/ihearofsherlock and so on. And you can find all of our shows.
Yes.
So let's say you want to go back in time.
How would I do that? Do I need a TARDIS?
Time machine. No. Just go to your internet browser and type in ihose.co. And after that, / and the episode, all one word. So ihose.co/ihose77 will take you to our show 77, which I think was about the speckled band.
Yes.
Yeah, we just talked about that.
We should do, you know what? We should quiz each other on show numbers, see how well we do. How well you remember. This is your Sherlockian life. But right. Yeah.
I think you win. Yeah.
Only because I'm all over that. But those are all of the electronic, media, ways that you can get in touch with us. But of course, the old fashioned way, works too, doesn't it, Bert? You can still try some other tried and true methods.
Well, sure. I mean, we're coming up on the 4th of July. One of the things we really like to do is to receive rockets. I don't know if we've talked about this lately, but if you have any highly combustible, sparkling type materials, particularly if you're near Canton, Michigan, one of the things you could do is sort of point them in the general direction of our houses. First, affixing something scrawled on a paper towel and inserted up just above where the fuse goes. And we'd love to get those kinds of messages. They're a lot of fun.
Well, I'll tell you what, Bert, if that comes true, then I will raise a Molotov cocktail in your direction.
I'll drink to that, Dr. Molotov.
Oh, but please do that. And, if you would like to help support the show and everything we do, we would love to have your support either via PayPal or Patreon. Both of those buttons are available on ihearofsherlock.com, or go directly to those sites as well. The amounts that you contribute help us to keep the lights on here in the studios, help keep the squirrels running the internet that power the download machines, and help us do what we do. Everything from paying for email distribution to transcripts to web hosting and sound hosting, you name it. There's a lot that goes into this. What a pain in the rear this whole show sounds like.
It's an enterprise.
God. Why do we do this?
I don't know. Let's stop.
Oh, no, let's go, and get ourselves over to the gaslit corner. Wow. See, this is great because even if we don't get funding through Patreon, the gas still flows. So there's nothing wrong with reading by gaslight here. Well, and in this case, I thought that rather than simply go to the traditional Baker Street Journal pages and pull something from there, we could actually pull from Canada and Sherlock Holmes. And there is a chapter in let me see, I think it's in the 4th section here, by our good friend Chris Redmond. Part 5, Scholarship in the Great White North. His piece is titled The Lure of the Chase. And interestingly, this short article was written by a teenaged Chris Redmond as an editorial in the Baker Street Pages, number 24, June 1967. It was a mimeograph journal put out by the Baker Street Page Boys. It's called The Lure of the Chase. There's no one who can resist forever the lure of the Sherlockian chase. Amused, skeptical, and patronizing as he may be at the obscure researches of the Sherlockian, whose forte is chronology or textual criticism, he is still utterly susceptible to the stimulating call, "Come, Watson, come! The game is afoot!" And when a Sherlockian meeting is publicized, or a disciple of the great detective speaks with startling passion or concern of his preoccupation, the reaction is likely to be merely cynical. No one who's not himself a fanatic can understand this or any other mania, and perhaps it's just as well. Were the whole world Sherlockian, would the hobby be as enthralling as its obscurity and exclusiveness make it? Nevertheless, it is well that the new Sherlockians are regularly made. If they are not, it is inevitable that the scholarship would eventually die out. More compellingly, a Sherlockian must have someone with whom to share and savor his discoveries, and cannot consider a close friendship quite complete unless it includes that sharing and savoring. The propagation of the mania of Sherlock Holmes is a worthy cause indeed. No one is immune to the siren call of Sherlock's many friends. It remains only to ask how that call is to be issued so enchantingly that it cannot be resisted. The answer is simple. Do not overwhelm the neophyte with statistics, facts, theories, dates, and dust. Only give him a volume of Sherlock Holmes, and let him discover the detective for himself.
Excellent. Beautiful.
Yeah.
That's very reminiscent of Edgar's writings.
It is. One might even say it's Redmond-isn't.
Oh,
I'm sorry. That was uncalled for. Well, this has been a Canadian stronghold of an episode. I don't know about you, but I'm in the mood for some Canadian bacon.
Yeah, with a little maple syrup.
Well, with any luck, Justin Trudeau will be running by our studio windows just outside and waving to everyone as the PR machine kicks into high gear.
Oh, we need to give him an I Hear of Sherlock badge to wear.
I'm sure he'd love it. But in the meantime, folks, we thank you for being part of our family here. If you want to continue, if you want to propagate this for others, please leave us a rating and review on the platform of your choice where you listen to us, whether it's Google Play or iTunes or Stitcher, Spreaker, wherever it is. Let people know what you think of the show. And in the meantime, I'll let you know what I think of my colleague, Mr. Burt Wolder.
And I will keep my admiration and depth of gratitude to Scott Monty, my own person. Oh, well, I guess it's not much of a secret now. No, so that's that.
The game's afoot.
You know, I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I'm neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.
Can I mention just two more articles in the book that were written for us by a man by the name of Jamie Portman, who is one of Canada's best known and longest established theater and drama critics. And he attended the premiere of The Incredible Murder of Cardinal Tosca when it was first performed down in the Maritimes, where the playwrights lived. And he wrote about that experience. It was a dark and stormy night, and it was a dark and stormy night. And back when Murder by Decree was made, he interviewed Christopher Plummer and the people involved at the time, and he wrote about that for us as well. The very Canadian murder mystery. Most of the people involved in that were Canadian.
Yeah.
So those are two articles in the book that are original for the book, written for the book, commissioned for the book, and which have material about key points in Sherlockian history, Murder of Cardinal Tosca and the Murder by Decree, which people wouldn't know. And I'm sure you did notice the photograph on page 129 where a bootmaker by the name of True Davidson, who was a member of the Order of Canada,
yes,
and whose Order of Canada citation talked about her work on Sherlock Holmes, believe it or not. Anyway, she is shown adjusting the deerstalker of Chris Redmond in 1972. So you can figure out how old Chris Redmond was when this picture was taken. I love it.
And interestingly, that is at the conclusion of the article called The Adler Commission on Porn in the Canon. So if that's not enough to get you to buy this book, I don't know what is.